again, I think it starts with leadership, and it starts with modeling the behaviors that you want to see in the rest of your teams, so that your teams don't feel like they need to accept every meeting. Or if they send you a meeting invite and you say, "Where's the agenda?" and then decline it, then they'll think really hard about making sure that the meeting that they're calling and that they're asking for your time for is valuable, not only to you, but to everyone else.
Welcome to You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. You are ambitious in life and in your career, but something is missing. You want to bring more of your passion to what you do. Because let's be honest, you pour a ton into your work, and it needs to mean more. I'm your host, Laura Ising. I'm a mom, wife, PhD, coach, advocate, introvert, and indoor rowing fanatic. I'm passionate about living a life that's in line with my values. We'll give you the actionable tips and tools you need to lead with your values, make a difference, and have career success. The world needs more diversity and authenticity in the top jobs at organizations. Your leadership belongs there. You belong in the C-Suite. What gets you up in the morning? What drives your decisions? What do you stand for? No idea, not even sure where to start? I use my values to guide my life and career. It's the basis of how I've built boundaries for myself and stuck to them. Are you ready to dig into what matters to you? Go to thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet. That's thecatchgroup.com to download your free values worksheet to get to your core values and take action on what matters most. Welcome to this week's episode of the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Today, I'm excited to welcome our guest, Yari Ising. Yari is the founder and CEO of the Ising Agency, whose mission is to simplify life for creative teams by offering operations, recruiting, and administrative support. She has a background in television production, media and communications, and has managed live events and built in-house creative teams for Fortune 500 companies. For the last decade, she's helped get the right people in place to build the most efficient and productive workflows. Today, she is proud to have built her own small but mighty virtual support agency dedicated to untangling all the little and big knots that keep tripping you up, slowing you down, and keeping your team from running efficiently. In our conversation, we talked about how busy we all are. Is this a badge of honor? Are we all just really bad at managing our time? What is this really about? We talked about how meeting culture, or lack thereof, can be one of the biggest impacts on our business. How lack of expectations in meetings on what contribution is expected leads us to attend so many meetings, leading to context switching, which burdens our mental load, and we just end up doing a ton of multitasking, which isn't benefiting anyone. We talked about all the things that you can do as a leader to move to an essentialist philosophy, to have intentional meetings that are impactful and move the needle, and when to do less and why that's important. Yari gave us so many tangible examples of how you can model these behaviors as a leader and give your teams permission to do the same. This episode is so timely as we get into the holiday season. I know you'll be inspired to do less and have better meetings. Let's get started. Well, I want to welcome you to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to share the space for you today and to talk all about the things that we're going to talk about in terms of having better meetings, having less meetings, getting more stuff done, all the good stuff. But before we do that, I'd love to hear just more about your life, kind of career story, wherever you want to start.
Sure. I won't start at the very beginning, but I think it's important for context, like my journey on how I got here. I grew up in probably one of the most dangerous cities in the nation, and worked my way through high school and college and things like that. And I was the first in my family to graduate college. So I kind of started to navigate the world kind of with a brand new perspective that I don't think anyone else in my family had had. So that led me to kind of exploring, what I could possibly do in college. And so I went into public relations and advertising, and that seemed to be like a really solid niche for me and my personality, and industry. So leaving college, or after graduation, I moved up to New York City and worked in a museum as their event coordinator and office manager. And I really love the live event and the moving and grooving and all the energy of events, which led me eventually into a career in television and then into a media staffing company where I worked for a few years. So that journey that led me to the media staffing company really kind of married all of the things that I loved about working in production, and that I don't want to call it busyness, but just the high stakes and the moving and grooving of all of that activity with the ability to put teams together for in-house agencies. And so that's kind of where I got my start and really hit my stride with my career, and eventually led to where I am today. And so I've been working in the people industry, and in putting together teams and trying to help make the teams as efficient and productive as possible for, the course of the past decade or more. And that's kind of led me to starting the Icing agency, because I've actually been in working with a lot of different people, a lot of different personalities, and a lot of different industries, specifically in the creative field. I kind of saw that there was a lot of emphasis and focus on the production of the work, and an emphasis on doing all the quote duties as assigned. And over time, you kind of see that people start getting overwhelmed with all those additional duties or things that maybe they originally took on because it was at the core of their work, but then it kind of snowballed into something different where it's kind of distracting them. And I saw the impact of that on teams and on the mental health of teams even before the pandemic. And so I started the Icing agency as like a resource for leaders to be able to help kind of make the work that folks are working on, the most impactful work, and take everything else off their plate that still need to be done, but kind of refocusing their energies and reprioritizing where their time and attention is being spent. So that's a very long answer for how I got here, and what my background is.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, as you're working with clients now, what are the things that they come to you with? Like, and I know as a consultant too, it's like sometimes they come to you with a thing that they think they need, but really they need the other thing. So, do you see that? Like, what are the symptoms of the things that people come to you with? They're trying to gain more efficiencies or be more focused. What kinds of stuff?
I think a big part of what I do and what my team does is if there's a sudden influx of work that maybe they weren't expecting, they feel like their head is like they're trying to keep their head above water and keep up with the new volume of work while also maintaining the previous cadence of the work that's expected from other clients of theirs.
Right.
It helps to kind of have a second set of eyes to really take a look at, why is this workload so overwhelming? Yes, we'll take all of the background work off of your plate so that you can still run, your normal cadence of your normal workflow. But how can we improve it? And that's kind of what I call the clear the chaos process. To your point exactly, is they come to you with like, I just need someone to do this thing. And I kind of take it a step further and say, how do we get it so that you don't need my help in the future? So we kind of really sit down and take a look at the overall picture of, all right, while we're working on the tactical things that I can't give an example because there's just so many different things that we can take off of people's plates, but during this time, while we're working on this, how can we improve your future workflows, or like strategically looking at the bigger picture?
So sometimes it's the overwhelm and it's like, I just need help with this initial task, when really it's okay, let's just get it back down to the foundation of how are we doing this? Is it a repeated task? Can we find efficiencies so then you're good in the future and you don't need to call me again in a panic kind of deal?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the first questions that I ask is, okay, what are you doing now that you can be doing less of? So let's
Ooh.
let's take the low hanging fruit and just eliminate some of that stuff. So that, there are some exercises, and I talk about them on my blog. And if anybody knows me, they know that like I'm a huge fan of the essentialist philosophy. I'm a huge fan of using the Eisenhower matrix. And while it's essentially supposed to be or it's meant for individual productivity, it can be applied to an entire team.
Yeah. So let's talk just as a grounding for everybody. First, I love that question. What can you be doing less of? Oh my God. So good. A good question. And then talk to me a little bit about what do you mean by the essentialist philosophy? And then can you describe the Eisenhower matrix and how individuals and teams use it?
Sure. Let's start with the Eisenhower matrix.
Okay.
And that is, you sit down literally with a piece of paper, or it could be a digital version of a piece of paper, and you list out the things that you have to do. They're urgent and super important, and only you can do it. And that goes into a box. There's a box where it's urgent, but it's not really that important. So you kind of make that the determination of, can I delegate this to somebody? Or can I schedule this for a different time period? Or can I just eliminate it altogether? So you can kind of like, those are the 4 quadrants, right? You have to do it. It's urgent. It's important. Only you can do it. This can be scheduled for a later date. And then the lower 2 quadrants, and I have a visual representation of it on my website, on my blog. So if you're interested, you can check it out there. And then the lower 2 quadrants are, you can delegate it to someone else, whether it be someone else on your team, or it can be delegated to an external partner from a team perspective. Or we can just completely eliminate it.
Do less of it, or don't do it
I love
anymore.
It.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the essentialist philosophy, once I kind of started adopting it, and so backtrack a little bit. Essentialism is something that's kind of always been a thing, and people really subscribe to that philosophy. But recently, Cal Newport, who's an author, he wrote a book about it recently and has kind of brought it more to the forefront in the mainstream. And teams are kind of like adapting to that mentality and that philosophy. Same with digital minimalism. That was another book that he wrote that I highly recommend. And really with essentialism, you have to be ruthless with what you're spending your time and your energy on. So if you have 10 things that are at the top, that are priorities for you, whether it be strategic or a task or something like that, take a look at those 10 things and look at the top 2 and eliminate the rest. Because if you're spending your time and stretching yourself thin across all 10 of those priorities, you're not making any movement on any of them. So if you're saying that these top 2 are the most important things to you, then go all in, focus on them.
Yeah.
So yeah, those are my interpretations of the essentialist mindset, and kind of how I employ the Eisenhower matrix for myself, my clients, and my teams.
I love that. And I think that, so when I go into working with clients or at an individual level or like a senior leadership team at the organizational level, often it's based on kind of some of the culture, and they're trying to get like this idea of a culture of innovation. We're moving to that. But shockingly, they never have enough time to spend on it, right? And so I'm doing the work for them to do some change management to get into this new culture that we want. But really, it's, hey, we haven't prioritized it. And so they have not been ruthless with anything. And often they have the aspiration. There's high aspiration to prioritize and to focus, but there is very low action on prioritization and focus. There's almost no deprioritization. It's almost like yes and this culture of yes and, which I know is supposed to come from a good place, but like yes and like no and no. Like I can't. If I hear a yes and, I'm like, there's no, like, where are we can't yes everything. And so how can we really have the yeses that matter aligned to the things that we want? And so first of all, why do you think it's so hard for organizations, for leaders to deprioritize? And even more so, why aren't we doing it?
I think, to your point about innovation, I think sometimes it's counterintuitive, right? Where people tend to hold on to, this is the way that we do things. these are our traditions, these are our rituals, these are, we have a weekly meeting on Tuesday at 4 p.m. What gets accomplished in these meetings, we can talk about that later. But the fact that we've got these like standards of operation that aren't really like, how often are you auditing your rituals? How often are you auditing whether or not those things still serve you? And so when you get caught up in this is the normal way of us doing things, and then adding a layer of, but we want to innovate, it's counterintuitive, or I don't know if that's the right word, but it's counterproductive, I guess is the word, right? Where, again, if you have a standing meeting on a Thursday and people just show up and they're talking about things because you've called the meeting and you told them that you want to hear something from them, and they don't know why they're there or what they're sharing or what they're talking about in that meeting, then it's a waste of time that you could have used to do some of the deep work for the strategic stuff. So I think that that's a part of it, and that kind of trickles down, right? Where you're doing a lot of context switching and things like that, that your teams you say that you want to do something, you give them direction, but if you don't give them the breathing room to be able to nurture that, then you kind of stagnate. And then you look down the road, you're looking at your roadmap 3 months from now, and things are not much different than they were 3 months ago. So I think taking a hard look and doing an audit of not only, and I'm talking specifically about meetings, because I think that meetings are the biggest leech of our time, are meetings. And curtailing like unnecessary meetings, I think, is at the very core, right? So yeah, I don't know if that like eloquently answers the question, but I think having an audit first and foremost kind of I find opens people's eyes to being like, oh my goodness, we could have had all this extra time to be able to focus on things that we just haven't had time for.
Yeah, absolutely. It feels like there's like some statistics out there that like even more, cultures that have like psychologically safe teams and like are sharing their best ideas feels like they have less meetings because they trust each other and they can get to decisions faster. I do not know where I read that, but I feel like that is a thing. I'll try and find it and put it in the show notes. But this idea of just less meetings is always so like, who wouldn't want to sign up for that? Like everybody wants that. Less meetings, and just the ones that we have, can they just be better in general? Can they have a purpose? If it's to build culture, then let's build culture. If it's to make a decision, then let's actually make the decision in the meeting. Like all of those kinds of things. But I love just this idea of just the audit of all the time and all the things are in these meetings that may or may not be necessary anymore. So first and foremost, doing that. My award-winning book, Values First: How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want, is now available in audiobook. Since the book released just last year, the biggest question that I've gotten from readers is it available in audiobook? In this book, you'll get to hear my most pivotal career stories and some of the successes of my clients as you learn about the Values First framework and how you can take action on your life and career. The audiobook is narrated by me, so if you love this podcast, you'll love the audiobook. Values First: How Knowing Your Core Beliefs Can Get You the Life and Career You Want is now available on Audible and iTunes. What are the kinds of questions that you might be asking yourselves if it's essential or not? Like, how do I know if I'm even a good auditor of if I need to be there? Because I would bet that we're kind of probably not good at that either.
Well, I think it starts with auditing your own calendar, right? As a leader, taking a look at the meetings that you've accepted and that you're participating in, and what your expectations are of these meetings, right? And what your contribution level is to that meeting, right? So starting with yourself first, taking a look at the calendar and saying, okay, I have this reoccurring, I don't know, weekly staff meeting. Do I need to be there? Yes, because decisions need to be made. All right, that's a meeting that we can keep. How can I communicate what my expectations are from that meeting with my team that's going to be giving me information, giving me the information that I'm looking for? So one, setting an agenda. If there is no agenda, I'm not accepting. And people joke all the time about that because, like it kind of becomes, I guess, a habit, right? Where if, someone sends me a calendar invite, I ask, what am I supposed to be contributing? What are your expectations for my contribution in this meeting? All right, great. Put it on the agenda or kind of frame the agenda so that it's very clear to me and everyone else that's involved in the meeting what's expected, so that they then, when they get new calendar invites, they can see and audit for themselves. Is this something that I need to be here for? And take away the shame. That's another thing, is take away the shame of not accepting a meeting. Like, if you absolutely need me there for something, fine, I will be there and I will contribute in the way that I'm supposed to. But also, if you see the agenda and you're like, I don't know if I have anything to contribute that's of value to this conversation, so I'm just not going to go. And I find that, like, oftentimes they find themselves in these meetings and they're like in there for 10 minutes, like, I don't know if this was a meeting that I was supposed to be in. And then they're just multitasking anyway.
Yeah. They go off camera. Yeah. They go off camera and they start multitasking.
Exactly.
To get something else.
And that's also a disservice to yourself, right? Because you're multitasking and you're paranoid that maybe somebody's going to call on you.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I'm focusing on the work that I need to be prioritizing, but I'm still listening and paying attention. So you're not really giving your full attention to what you're supposed to be prioritizing. So that's kind of like, I went on a bit of a tangent there because I could talk about meetings all day and how to make them effective. So as far as being a good auditor, I think it starts with leadership, and it starts with modeling the behaviors that you want to see in the rest of your teams, so that your teams don't feel like they need to accept every meeting. Or if they send you a meeting invite and you say, where's the agenda, and then decline it, then they'll think really hard about making sure that the meeting that they're calling and that they're asking for your time for is valuable, not only to you, but to everyone else. So there's, there are a few things that you can do. And then there's also, when you're in a meeting, taking time to really kind of evaluate, can this meeting be repurposed for something else? So instead of canceling the meeting altogether, what can we do, or how can we repurpose this meeting to accomplish another goal? Or so there are a few things like that I kind of like, I think about in my own teams. I lead a team of 13 people. So everybody already knows kind of my sentiment around like meetings. And it's just because we do it so often and it's ingrained in our culture and our meeting culture. And we audited just this past week. I had a Parable session. I don't know if you're familiar with Parable, but
no, tell me more. Yeah.
It's like it's a retro software. So if you're in the tech world, you're familiar with retros. You kind of sit with the team to figure out what's gone wrong, what's gone right, what can we improve for the future, and all that stuff.
Kind of after action review, kind of.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's a software that helps to kind of streamline that process. So we do it every single quarter, and we sit down and we have all of my team will submit anonymous feedback. So they'll say, again, one of the questions will be, what are we doing well? What can be improved? What do you want to see more of? What do you want to see less of? Which is always an important question to ask. And like, what other thoughts do you have? So every quarter we have a meeting where we sit down, we review, we vote on what things are really, because you don't really know what issues are with your team until you've asked them what the issues are and what the blockers are. And you also giving them the dual, you can submit things anonymously, but I want to talk to you about it. It kind of reduces the keyboard warrior mentality where you're free and it's anonymous for you to be able to complain about things. But also, I need your voice in the room to be able to advocate for what that issue is and how we can fix it. So most recently, and the reason I brought this up is because most recently we had a conversation about one of the meetings that we had that's supposed to be like a brainstorming session. Like we dedicate an hour just for brainstorming. And if one team needs something from another, how do we work together to, kind of marry a bunch of ideas? We try to have open and free flowing feedback for creative stuff and events and things like that. And so one of my teammates said, I think maybe we can use that time to just have it be a culture building, meeting, and less about brainstorming and more about culture. So we're trying it.
Great.
So we're not adding another meeting to our calendar, but we're repurposing one that was already existing.
Yeah. Oh, I love that example. Oh my goodness. There's so many things that you just said in there about that I want to touch base on. So you said meeting culture. And so I do a lot of work with leaders on their individual values and then their team values. And your meeting culture can absolutely be tied and should be to your culture, like your organizational culture. And if you don't have a meeting culture, you probably know it's those times where just somebody puts a meeting on your calendar with no agenda usually, and you accept it, and you're back to back to back, and then you just jump from one meeting to the next. And sometimes you know what it is, and sometimes you're not sure what your contribution will be, right? And you're just kind of switching from one topic to the next. And then at the end of the day, you might get some of your other work done, or at night. Right. Yep. And so if you don't have a meeting culture, well, that is your meeting culture. It's like unorganized, not very intentional. And so if you are doing stuff like Jodi's doing, you have an intentional meeting culture where expectations and behaviors are completely aligned to the rest of your culture. So I'd love to share an example with this one client that I have. One of their organizational values is purposeful collaboration. And when they describe purposeful collaboration, one of the things that as they're growing, they called it the quote unquote right people in the meeting, like the decision makers, right? And so as they thought about that, and they're still on their journey of building it out, they're still, getting to the point where they always have agendas and those kinds of things. They're not fully there yet. But we were taking a look at some of those behaviors and they're like, okay, well, what does the right people in the meeting even mean? Like, is that inclusive? Is that like, basically it's like kind of level of contribution and it's decision makers. And so we kind of talked about what that looks like and how do you know if you are inviting the right people? They talked about like, do they need to be consulted on something? Are they going to help you make that decision? Not just that they need to be informed, right? And so those are some of the questions that they're asking themselves to set up and to get to their meeting culture, to align it to their organizational culture. And it's that kind of thoughtful work that will eventually lead them to have less meetings and to get those right people in those right rooms. And if we're not thinking about, that as leaders, I think we're completely missing how much impact culture can have at every single level, on a one-on-one, to a group meeting, to an all hands meeting, all those kinds of things. So it's all connected. But I loved how you said meeting culture, and meeting culture is absolutely tied to organization and team culture too. So I love that. Any thoughts on that, and like how to create some of those expectations or thought starters on building your meeting culture as a leader?
I look at it from two different lenses, from the leadership perspective and also from an individual contributor perspective. Asking all those questions that you're talking about are absolutely important. Like those are the things that that's the important work that needs to be done, right? To kind of really figure out what that looks like. And I think setting the example is important for the individual contributor to instill trust while also keeping the transparency, right? Because there are some meetings where, you kind of just want to know what's going on and you're just kind of, you're just wanting to retain information or kind of just learning about what's going on so that you have a better understanding of the overall vision and work that's being done, right? So there are times where you do have to just come and sit in. Yeah. But in being more intentional and asking those questions and making sure that we're being respectful of other people's time from a leadership perspective, and trusting your team to be able to do the same is, I think, so important, right? So you're empowering your team to say, you don't have to be in every single meeting. Use your discretion if you want to join. I think it kind of goes hand in hand, right? Where we have to trust our people to be productive without looking at their calendar and seeing that they're in meetings all day and then being like, oh, I'm not going to bother Laura because she's super busy today because she's in meetings all day. Is she like, does she need to be in those meetings? But, I find that sometimes it's hard for people to walk away and say no to meetings because if their calendar is wide open, it doesn't look like they're busy enough.
Isn't that so interesting? Like the currency of if we're good is how busy we are. It's almost like a badge of honor. I'm triple booked today.
Yep.
Like how many of us can say like that you see all the color coding and all the things and
Yep.
it's fascinating. And why do you think that is a badge of honor? Because you can see it. It's like visible. Is that it?
I think it's the virtual calendar is a digital representation of what one of my friends actually years ago, he said, anytime someone walks into the room, if I go like this, if I put my head down, or if I look like I'm busy, or if I look like I'm stressed, they won't bother me because they know that I'm busy. So that is the digital representation of what I've just described, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I think, is it a badge of honor? I mean, it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be. Sometimes it feels like it is, but sometimes it's also like, I'm so busy, I can't do another thing. So it kind of helps save us from other work, maybe. But like you said, if you have free time, then people are questioning, why do you have free time? Like, isn't that interesting? And then I also just tell people block it and it's your thinking time or because you're not doing something, right? It's project time or whatever. And so one of the things that I do and I talk to my clients about is like, when are you thinking? When are you doing that strategic work? When are you, and like actually block it and then like keep that promise and don't schedule over it, which often we do, right? We give that time away. But even that, it feels weird sometimes to set that meeting for ourselves if we're not in another meeting with somebody else.
And that happens so often. And that's why I always encourage people, back to the lead by example, where we have meeting free Friday rule, no meetings on Friday. If there's something, obviously there are going to be urgent things that come up, and there are things that maybe, the schedules just don't align, and it's really important that we meet this week, then by all means, as long as you can make a case for a Friday meeting, we'll have a Friday meeting. But, communicating that and being firm with that is just another example of instilling that the culture that you want to build for yourself and adhering to that no meeting Friday rule, or Monday, or no meeting 9 to noon on Tuesdays rule, will definitely kind of help shift that culture. And so, coming up for the holidays, we have 2 weeks of no meeting time. So from December 18th through the beginning of the year, there are no meetings on the calendar. And that is, so that people can actually enjoy their time off and not feel like they're missing something. Mm-hmm. And 2, to give people permission. If our C-suite can commit to not having a meeting, and they're the most important people, and I'm using air quotes there, like, because everybody obviously has a role to play, and they're just as important as the C-suite. But people have the mentality of like, oh, I'm too busy, I have to take a meeting during this time. So if our C-suite is not busy, or can dedicate themselves to, or commit themselves to not having that meeting, having no meeting time, then so can you.
Yeah, and every time leaders meet, they're creating so much work they don't even realize, right? Mm-hmm. Like the meetings will then have outcomes that their teams will need to go do. Yep. And that will create a cascade of more meetings and more meetings. I love this idea of modeling, and then gives others permission to do the same. I think it is just so important that we're modeling the behaviors that we want others to have. It's not, because often we say, I want my team to have that vacation, that uninterrupted time. And sometimes we do that because we then step in meetings, or we take that burden on ourselves, when really how much work is really going to get done in those couple of weeks anyway. And like, give people the permission and the breath to just, be with their families and actually be on vacation, and don't feel like they do have to check in. I think that's another really important point. Even if everybody else is on vacation and you're still having meetings, they're still going to check in, because they don't want their inbox to be bananas over the holidays, and then for it to be not worth it when they come back at the beginning of the year. So even for the people that are working, like for essential jobs that need to be on the clock or whatever, just minimize the meeting, so we don't feel like we have to, like we are missing something, because I think that is a real thing. So this idea of clearing calendars beyond just vacation is what you mean, right? It's like we're still working and doing all the things, maybe prioritizing for next year, whatever, but we're not having actual business related meetings in that 2-week block of time. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's, it's the same idea with our meeting free Fridays, or, org wide, once, even if it's just once a month where we all commit to not having meetings, it helps with just overall not having the context switching constantly, which is exhausting. And we don't really think about that's a whole nother conversation about the mental health and the mental wellness of your teams when they're constantly context switching. And also, kind of being able to really focus your time and energy on things that are strategic without interruption. And, there are just a multitude of benefits of having at least one meeting free day a month, at least. Some people can't commit to that because they're either meeting with customers or, clients and things like that. So their, availability is going to vary based on their clients' availability. But having something that you hold sacred as far as like time, is so important.
It's such a valuable resource. It is such a valuable resource for individuals and teams and organizations. So I love that. I love that action as a suggestion as we get into the holidays. The last thing that I will ask you, I want to know, what other things can leaders do, like right now, whether or not their company, maybe they're in a company that has really great meeting culture, maybe they don't. But either way, like what are some quick things that folks can do right now?
So I have there's actually a freebie on my website of things like I've got like a ton of different pointers and things like that folks can kind of tap into that they can do today. One of the biggest things, and where I usually start, again, it goes back to the start of our conversation, is think about what you can do less of. And really, have a conversation with your team, doing something like the audit that we talked about before. That's something that you can do today in an existing meeting. Maybe if it's not a priority, if there's not something that's like super urgent priority meeting that needs to happen today, we can repurpose an existing one, and really just send your team an anonymous, let's say a Google form. It's as easy as that, right? Where they can submit their thoughts, their ideas anonymously. And you'll be surprised that things that you think are an issue in your team and that impacts your culture and their productivity might just be a symptom of something larger that you could easily fix in a day. So I would start with, the people that are doing the work and are feeling the day-to-day strain and the burden of whatever it is that, are issues that you've identified, for yourself, to really get to the core of, oh, is it just that, you don't feel heard because we don't have enough feedback sessions? All right, that's something that we could do. We can add something on the calendar, which again, it's not great to add something else on the calendar, but sometimes it's necessary.
Or
because you need to have those
repurpose.
conversations.
Yeah, or repurpose to your
Exactly.
other point. Yeah, for sure. I love the starting with what can we do less of. I love that question so much. And we'll put a link in the show notes to that, to some of those tips that you mentioned and the downloads for teams to take a look at. I just want to thank you so much for being here today. I think we could talk for another couple of episodes, so I'd love to have you back and we can focus our time on a couple other things. But thank you just so much for sharing your thought leadership. I think it's just such a relatable topic, and all of us, if we think we are doing this well, we can still probably be doing something else better. And what a great time of year to think about some of these things. Doing a retro after action review at the end of the year is a great way to close out the year, to set you up for success for next year too. And I love that idea of blocking for no meetings as well. Just lots of things that you can do as a leader to impact your team. I just love it so much. So thank you so much for being here today. I want to thank you so much for listening to the You Belong in the C-Suite podcast. If you are enjoying this content, please remember to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. By leaving a review, you are helping others find this content. We will be featuring 5-star reviews on air in upcoming episodes. Editing and support for the podcast is done by S&E Podcast Management. To get more tips and tools to help you live a life guided by your values, go to thecatchgroup.com. Keep your boundaries and take care.